Welcome to this episode of Eureka, and we are going to have a very interesting, informative conversation with Professor Nagendra Kumar Singh, who is a National Professor at Indian Council of Agricultural Research, New Delhi, and he has worked on genomics. Before we start this conversation, let's take a quick look at his brief profile. Keep watching Eureka.
Specializing in plant biotechnology, genomics and molecular plant breeding, Dr. Nagendra Kumar Singh is the National Professor and BP Pal Chair since 2010 at ICAR, National Research Center on Plant Biotechnology of Indian Agricultural Research Institute at New Delhi. He graduated from BHU Varanasi in 1978, completed his MSc also from BHU in 1980 and obtained his PhD from University of Adelaide, Australia in 1985. Professor N.K. Singh has led large multi-institutional research projects on gene discovery, molecular breeding and transgenic development. His outstanding scientific contribution is the discovery and detailed characterization of wheat seed storage protein, trypsin, and showing its importance in nutritional and bread-making quality of wheat. He also developed novel efficient methods for the analysis of low molecular weight subunits of wheat gluten proteins, including genetic mapping and elucidation of their role in bread and chapati making quality. He has played leadership role in the decoding of rice, tomato and wheat genomes. As part of international consortia, carried out comparative analysis of rice and wheat genomes, completed the sequencing of pigeon pea genome, first plant genome to be sequenced entirely in India. Professor N.K. Singh is the recipient of several nation honors and awards, including DBT National Bioscience Award 2001-2002, ICAR Rafi Ahmed Kidwai Award 2007-2008, ICAR Norman Borlaug Award 2014.
Thank you, sir. It's a good opportunity. We are going to learn quite a lot from you. I mean, I have seen your background, your work from CFTRI, you have been to IARI, and then lots of interesting work. So let me start with your earliest of the work. That when you came to India from your postdoc and a PhD in Australia and then came back to India, the first job you got was in CFTRI, right? That is Central Food Technology Research Institute.
Yes, sir. Let me say that before I say that, first up I like to pay my respect to my teachers, my parents and my family who enabled me to come to this stage and do this kind of work. Okay. Now, starting from very humble beginning, I got the opportunity to do my BSc Agriculture and MSc Agriculture in Banaras Hindu University, which is Basme. And from there, I got the chance to go to Australia and do my PhD and postdoctoral there. And then I was called. I had applied at several places, including the BHU also, Pantnagar, CFTRI. Those who are working in this relevant field. And then to my surprise and to surprise of my professor in Australia, I got a straightway appointment letter offer.
Oh, okay.
As a scientist C in a CSIR institute at CFTRI, which is a very famous institute for working on the food technology. So there I had continued my work on the wheat quality, working on the wheat proteins, which I had discovered a new class of wheat protein. Which were very relevant for making the bread and chapati making quality. So
this is where I want to ask you a question. That you said that you found a class of new proteins. What are they called as?
We named them as a trypsin because the wheat is Triticum aestivum. So we named them as a trypsin.
Trypsin, okay.
And these are actually legume protein, like a dal protein in wheat background.
Okay, so which means that if that protein is high in wheat, which means that something like the kind of protein that you might get from dal or pulses you might get from the wheat itself.
Like to have a
otherwise wheat is largely carbohydrate, right?
No, wheat has the protein, but its protein quality is not good for nutritionally. It is good for making bread and chapati, but it lacks certain amino acid called lysine or tryptophan.
Okay.
but it is rich in sulfur amino acid. On the other hand, the legumes, the dals, they are more balanced amino acid, but they are poor in sulfur amino acid. So when you combine the dal and roti or dal and chawal, then you get a complete balanced amino acid nutrition. And here this protein was already present in wheat. Because of their common origin, wheat also has a small proportion of dal kind of protein. That's the one I discovered. And that has very positive effect on the nutritional quality as well as bread and chapati making quality. So that work I continued at CFTRI, even at IRI, and recently we published this.
So one question here, just for our clarification. See, when you say that you found a protein which has an impact on the protein quality of the wheat, I can understand. But when you say that chapati and bread making quality, how does this protein help in chapati and bread making quality?
See, both bread making as well as chapati making quality, it requires a elastic property. When you knead the dough and you pull it, it has certain kind of elasticity. That depends on the polymerization of the protein. When we protein they join together and make big polymer like a rubber, so that elasticity is attributed to that. And both these trypsin, the new protein, and the gluten protein, which was the main constituent, they have that property to provide the elasticity.
Okay. So which means that if this new protein was slightly higher, then you will be having a good elastic property. So which means you can make a very good chapati.
Yeah, in fact, we found one of the Indian varieties, which is called K68 from the Kanpur University. It has higher amount of that protein. And then we discovered that particular gene which makes it better with the version of the that same gene, trypsin.
Okay.
Different varieties will have different version of the same gene. They are called alleles, alternative forms of that gene. So that alternative forms, now we have transferred in a variety which is high yielding, and is then chapati making quality and nutritionally also better.
Okay. That's interesting. So you were saying earlier that the work that you did in CFTRI, you continued after coming to IARI also, and then on this particular aspect, what happened later?
So after CFTRI, I went to Pantnagar. There I worked for 6 years. We established molecular biology and biotechnology department there. And then we established the teaching program in MSc and PhD with Professor Garg was there. And then there I also worked on the transformation of wheat. We did the first transfer. I had planned to actually increase the amount of this protein, which can be done only through genetic engineering, because there is not enough variation within wheat. There is some variation, but not enough to make it, impact on the nutritional quality in a significant way. But that work, then after that I shifted to IRI here. I was called by the then DG Dr. R.S. Paroda. He wrote letter to our Vice Chancellor, that I need this person. We have to establish the rice genome work in India. So that's when I came here. And then we had to establish this.
So we will come back to this issue of rice genome work which you did, which is a very pioneering work. After the break, we'll discuss this. We need to take a very short break. We'll take a very short break here. Keep watching Eureka. We'll come back after a short break.
First up, we look at the new agri-export policy.
It is a very good effort from the government to make a policy which would be approved by the cabinet, so that the ministries will not have an opportunity to bring changes, frequent changes from time to time.
We have the data. It is not that data is a problem, both local and global. So based on that, what is more important is that we should have a regular policy.
Now we look at the topic of Permanent Commission for Women in the Armed Forces.
This was a very genuine demand. Government has accepted it. It is a step in the right direction. I am sure in future many more good things will happen for lady officers.
Division between combat and non-combat is somewhat artificial. In each arm, yes, there is a different environment in which you work. But in the end, the army has to fight as an organic whole.
Welcome back to Eureka. We are having a very wonderful conversation with Professor Nagendra Kumar Singh, who is a National Professor at Indian Council of Agriculture Research, New Delhi. Before the break, we were talking about your earlier work in CFTRI, about your work in wheat, which resulted in finding a new protein which helps in both nutritional quality as well as bread making or chapati making quality. You were pointing out that after that you shifted to, or rather you were called, I mean rather you were requested because your expertise was needed by IARA to establish rice genome.
After CFTRI, I went to Pantnagar, worked there for 6 years. Then from Pantnagar, I was called here at IARA.
IARA. So in IARA, this was perhaps the earliest effort in India of genome project, right?
That's absolutely right. Because as some people will know that the genome revolution come from the Human Genome Project, which is started in USA. And this project is started in 1990, and the first draft was published in year 2000 at the turn of the century. And similarly, a plant genome, the Arabidopsis, which is a kind of mustard grass, that was also published at the same time. Now these two projects, one in the animal that is human, and one in the plant, and there were global partnerships were there, including China, Japan, Europe, America. But India was not partner to this program.
Okay.
So as a result, India was lagging behind at least 5 years in the science of genomics research. Then the government decided that they want to take up and they want to start this genomic. That was again international program for sequencing the rice genome. And there were several meetings in DBT and ICR. And then I was participating in that meeting also, coming from the Pantnagar. And then finally it was decided the government will launch this program. This was a very big project, 50 crore, one of the biggest projects. So Delhi University South Campus, Professor Akhilesh Tyagi was there leading, and I was leading this project in ICR. So we had to start right from the scratch because we didn't have any experience. So we built the laboratories for doing different aspects of how to clone that rice gene, genomic DNA, make the library, then do fingerprinting, then isolate individual pieces and sequence them to perfection to the international standard. And there was a large amount of bioinformatics, the computational science was involved.
Okay.
So we developed a large team of scientists both at South Campus and also in ICR, in IARI, at National Research Center for Plant Biotechnology, which is established there. So that was from 2000 to 2005.
Okay, okay.
So
So that's how the rice genome project kind of initiated. So here I have a small question that perhaps, many people might come into their mind. I mean, if you look at humans, human is a species. Though we may differ in color, we may differ in, the hair pattern or anything of that kind, we are one species. So you take one representative human and then, sequence the genome. You can say in some way roughly that confers to almost all the human beings in the world. But when you talk about rice, I mean, we talk about various kinds of rice. I mean, rice of this, rice of that, I mean, so many things. I mean, at least in any region, you will find at least 20 to 30 varieties of rice. Which one you chose or what was the background?
So in fact, as you rightly said, in rice we have thousands or lakhs of varieties actually. Even our gene bank at NBPGR New Delhi, it has more than 1 lakh varieties of rice. At ERI, there is more than 1 lakh. So total, more than 2 lakhs varieties of rice has been preserved. Even many people say that during Green Revolution we lost all that varieties, but nothing is lost. Everything is preserved. If you want to cultivate them, you can take. But what happens that in a species, the one variety differs from another variety with less than 5% actually.
Okay.
So what we do, we choose one variety as a reference genome. And this was chosen by Japan as a Japonica type variety called Nippon Bare. Because Japan was providing 50% of the input. So this was a Japonica type variety to sequence as a reference genome. But now we have several varieties have been sequenced. In fact, 3,000 varieties have been sequenced now.
Okay. So in your project, how many varieties you sequence?
One variety.
You did
because
that.
You take one variety and finish it to perfection with less than one error in 10,000. If your 10,000 letter of genome you are reading through your research, then not more than one error in that.
Okay.
So it was very, very precise.
It was very, very precise.
And then other variety you simply compare with that, how much different they are. So other variety you don't need to sequence to perfection, but one variety which is called reference genome, that has to be, that is true in every species, like in human also, in now we have done, whether it is a mango or human or tomato, any species you take. So because it will be too costly to have too many reference genome and it is not necessary.
And it may not also useful in long term. This is a very, very interesting point. Maybe this is where we will take a very short break. After the break, we are going to discuss about his other works related to tomato and other crops and plant material, and also about how he came into this agriculture research field. We'll take a very short break. Keep watching Eureka. We'll come back after a short break.
Art arisen from a multi-hued cultural canvas. Tradition and cultural fervour dating back centuries. And encircling them all, there's a magic that awes. Embrace your nation's brilliant human warmth. Watch Colours of India, Sundays at 9:30 p.m. on Rajya Sabha Television.
Welcome back to Eureka, and we are having a very interesting, informative conversation with Professor Nagendra Kumar Singh, who is a National Professor of Indian Council of Agricultural Research, New Delhi. So we have been talking about your earlier work, particularly how you are one of the pioneers in India of establishing genomic research. I mean, basically making the genomic map, and one of the earliest things that you did was rice. And of course, in addition to rice, there are also some of the international projects that you did of genomic mapping, right?
Yes. So Rice Genome Project we joined in 2000, although the project started in 1998.
Okay.
And then we finished it in 2005. The paper was published in Nature with high impact. Then with that experience, we were called upon by international community to join the tomato. And then DBT again funded that tomato genome project.
Okay.
There we did one full chromosome. Again, 10 countries were involved.
Okay.
Then subsequently, again, we are also recently finished the wheat genome, which is one of the biggest genome, 40 times bigger than rice.
Okay.
This is the 16,000 million letters are there in the in the wheat genome.
So basically, when there is an international project, I mean, each person is given one part of it to...
People share the responsibility because the genome, when we publish the genome, it is in the public domain. So that's why mostly it is public funded research. So we join hands together like a community effort and then make the genome available in the public domain. And that subsequently helps in gene discovery, breeding, all those things.
Okay. So basically, you worked on three major crops, wheat, rice and tomato with international participation.
That's right. But what is more satisfying to us, through that international partnership, we became at par with the whole world and we learned the trick of the trade. And really, really very satisfying experience in learning. But what was more satisfying, then there are several crops where international community has no stake. Suppose the pigeon pea is there. More than 90% produced and consumed in India, we also import. Similarly, jute is there, only India and Bangladesh. Mango is there. Like this, so many medicinal and aromatic crops, spices, they are specific to India. So
on this area, international partners may not be interested.
They may not be interested because it is not going to benefit them. So why is anybody should put their money? So we chose pigeon pea near about the same time at the tomato genome. And we started working on it. Then the genomic technology also changed from the earlier one. Now we have the next generation sequencing technologies. So we learned that one, and then for the first time in 2011, we sequenced the pigeon pea genome completely on our own without any
so it means it was a completely indigenous effort.
Completely indigenous.
Without international participation.
There was a very good coverage, space coverage also in that. And this was the first plant to be sequenced within India. Completely within India. Not only plant or any animal, any genome, eukaryotic genome, that is mainly higher organisms, sequenced fully in India. That was the first one. As a pigeon pea.
So pigeon pea was the first one. Then you took up jute and mango.
Then we took, with this similar logic, we chose a crop or a plant which is have very high economic significance for India, but no other country will have interest in that.
Okay.
So it is our own problem entirely, and then government was very supportive. They funded both the jute genome, the pigeon pea genome, and also we did mango genome. So these three genomes we have completed entirely on our own at our National Research Center for Plant Biotechnology in collaboration with the institute. Like the jute one, we did the jute institute at Barakpur.
Yeah.
And for the pigeon pea, we had the other institute, agriculture university.
So one question is that as a scientific effort, making a this kind of a genomic map is very interesting. But what other uses such kind of genomic maps can be of use?
Yeah, it is very important. I can tell you that this that's why the entire world puts a lot of money in the genomics research, because this is, you make a reference genome, just like having a map, of a country or a village or a city. Those maps, it seems that what is the use of this map?
Okay.
But in the genome, each and every base pair genes in the whole genome, there are nearly 50,000 genes are there, in case of rice or pigeon pea. Now, each gene performs a function. It may increase the yield, it may give you disease resistance, it may increase the quality. So once you have that reference, that helps you to do gene discovery. You identify the gene which performs a function. For example, in case of rice, after the publication of rice genome, the international community find a gene which makes the rice flood tolerant.
Oh, okay.
If the rice is submerged completely in the water, where the flood comes in eastern India, and if the rice is submerged for 2-3 days, it will completely wiped out. But these genes allow rice to become tolerant for 2 weeks of flooding, and then when flood goes again, that gene is called sub-1. So similarly, other genes like phosphorus utilization, for yield, for drought tolerance, many genes have been discovered in the case of rice, because rice is a front runner. It was done 10 years
So
back.
one is that once you have the map, you can discover the genes and then use that understanding to produce genetically modified materials.
That's right.
But here is where a lot of public have certain apprehension. There is a huge fear of genetically modified organisms, and particularly when it is genetically modified material in foodstuff. So as a person who is working in this field, what is your take on that?
So let me say that the genome information helps in gene discovery and also in breeding. It speeds up the whole process. And then once you find the gene, that gene you can transfer in other species also, because you know precisely the piece of DNA, what it makes, what function it does. That is the basis of genetic engineering. So when the particular variation is not available in that species, if it is available in that species, you just do the crossing hybridization and do the selection. Their genome helps. And then if it is not available, for example, there may be a gene, some disease resistance in rice, we can transfer from rice into wheat or from bacteria into wheat. For example, the Bt cotton, the gene for insect resistance was found in a soil bacteria. And then it is a protein actually. It makes a protein which is toxic to that particular insect but not to anything else. So it's a very, very safe actually. Because it's a protein, it is much safer than any chemical pesticide.
Okay.
So the fear, as you asked, the fear of the genetic modified crops, I think it is a unnecessary fear, because we have very robust system of the biosafety evaluation in place. In the globally, even in globally also people were fearful in the beginning. When the recombinant DNA technology came in USA for the first time in 1973. So when the people discovered that they can able to then join the DNA and make recombinant, so that time scientists, they had a self-imposed restriction because they were fearful that something will happen. But slowly that thing they tapered away, and now know that it is very much safe. Similarly with the genetic modification which came in 1995, the first crop. So these are very well fully tested. The feeding trials are there, toxicity, allergicity, animal feeding. I think they are subject to most stringent restriction, the genetic modified crop.
Than the other...
whereas the other crops without genetic modification can be equally toxic and dangerous.
Okay.
Because so the main issue is that we should test for the food safety and biosafety, not which method was used for creating it.
Okay.
So
that's your
the fear of the GM is no good, is totally unscientific, uncalled for. The food is safe or not, it has to be tested. Like some of the most potent poisons are natural, like ricin, it's a natural thing. I think everything is natural. I don't see anything in the world which is not natural. The only thing we have to see what is safe for us, what is not safe for us.
So now last question, because we don't have also much time, but it's a very curious thing. I mean, if you look at the time when you were a young person who finished your school and looking for future study opportunity, it is not that most people will choose agriculture as their area. So how come you landed up in this?
See, I was born in a village where we did primary education, on the tart patti like kind of things. Then the middle education we had some agriculture. In Uttar Pradesh, agriculture is there right from the beginning, in the school also if you want to.
So it is part of the school curriculum?
Yeah, in the junior high school. Then in the high school, I didn't have agriculture. I had the biology and science up to secondary. After secondary, even though the choice is there, because most of the parents want to make their children either engineer or doctor. So I was no exception. I studied biology. I appeared for PMT test once also. Then I was not particular about anything. We were taught, my uncle, my father, they taught that you should always, do something good. Whatever you do, it should be done, nicely, and always keep on doing something. So there was nothing planned as such. Then I was looking for admission in the university, and then I got admission in agriculture stream in BHU. So BHU being BHU, the name itself is sufficient. And I spent 5 years there, which transformed my whole attitude and education. So that's how I ended up in agriculture. In BSc AG and MSc AG I did from there. Then I got the fellowship to work in Australia.
Yeah, that's how the career in
so
agriculture.
So it is.
That's an interesting point that you made, which I think is a very important one for young people, which is wherever you land up, be good, do best. That's, I think, is a key message from his last part. With this, we need to end this conversation today because we don't have much time. We will end this conversation here, but we'll come back with another interesting conversation next week. Keep watching Eureka.